The Nova Arena's massive screens flickered with activity as thousands of spectators from dozens of species filled the stands. The annual Interstellar Combat Championship had drawn record crowds this year, largely due to the unprecedented success of Earth's representative, Rei Tanaka. A third-generation Japanese-Brazilian martial artist, Rei had defied all expectations by reaching the quarterfinals, the furthest any human had advanced in the tournament's 30-year history. The arena's energy shifted as the towering figure of Commander Kailas stepped into the spotlight. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue, the Drachnid warrior had dominated the championship for the past 5 years. Her species was known throughout the galaxy for their martial prowess, and she was considered their finest fighter in generations. Rei stood at the edge of the competitor's area, her muscular frame appearing almost diminutive compared to the other alien fighters. At 5 feet 9 inches, she had spent her entire life proving that size wasn't everything. Her black GI bore the patches of both Earth's United Combat Federation and her family's fighting school in Sao Paulo. Human. Kailas's voice boomed through the arena's translation system. Your presence in these quarters is unprecedented. Your species is young, weak, and inexperienced in the greater galaxy's ways of combat. The crowd murmured. Everyone knew of the Drachnid's infamous pride, but such a direct challenge was unusual even for them. Rei maintained her composure, years of training keeping her expression neutral despite the insult. Yet, Kailas continued, her head crest flaring with colors that the translation system identified as indicating respect. You have shown skill that defies your species' limitations. You have defeated 3 opponents that, by all physical metrics, should have overwhelmed you. The screens displayed Rei's previous matches, her victory over a 4-armed Xerxian using a perfectly timed shoulder throw, her tactical dismantling of a cybernetically enhanced Martian colonist, and her most recent win against a telepathic Venusian through sheer mental discipline and unpredictable fighting patterns. Therefore, Kailas declared, I challenge you, Rei Tanaka of Earth, to face me in single combat. Not in tomorrow's scheduled matches, but tonight, in the ancient way of my people. No tournament rules. No point system. A true test of warrior against warrior. The arena erupted in chaos. Such a challenge hadn't been issued in the championship's history. The tournament committee members could be seen frantically consulting their rulebooks and arguing amongst themselves. Rei stepped forward, her movement causing an immediate hush to fall over the crowd. She had learned enough about Drachnid culture to know that refusing such a challenge would be seen as a slight against not just Kailas, but her entire species. Moreover, it would reinforce every stereotype about humanity's weakness. Commander Kailas, Rei spoke, her voice clear and steady. I am honored by your challenge and accept with one condition. Kailas's scales rippled with interest. Name it, human. When I win, Rei said, emphasizing, when, with quiet confidence, you will acknowledge that humanity's strength lies not in our physical form, but in our adaptability in spirit. A low rumble emanated from Kailas's throat, the Drachnid equivalent of laughter. And when I win, you will publicly acknowledge that your species requires another century of development before presuming to compete at our level. Agreed. The tournament committee finally reached a decision. The challenge would be allowed, but would take place in the auxiliary arena, separate from the official competition. The announcement triggered a flood of activity as spectators rushed to secure viewing positions for the unprecedented match. As the crowd dispersed to the new venue, Rei's training partner and friend, Toshi Yamamoto, grabbed her arm. Are you crazy? Kailas has killed opponents in legal matches before. In an unsanctioned fight. I know what I'm doing, Toshi, Rei interrupted, beginning her warm-up stretches. I've studied every recording of her fights. She's powerful, yes, but predictable. She relies on her species' natural advantages, strength, reach, and those retractable claws. But she's never faced someone who truly understands energy redirection and ground fighting. The gravity on her homeworld is twice Earth's, Toshi persisted. Her bone density alone. Makes her less agile, Ray completed the thought. Every advantage has a corresponding weakness. That's what my grandmother taught me, what my mother refined, and what I've proven in every match since I was 12. The auxiliary arena was smaller but more intimate, its design reminiscent of ancient gladiatorial venues. As Ray walked toward the preparation area, she noticed representatives from various species studying her intently. She recognized the calculating looks, they were already placing bets, most likely against her. In the fighter's meditation chamber, Ray closed her eyes and centered herself. She recalled her grandmother's words, the true purpose of martial arts isn't to prove superiority, but to bridge understanding. Every fight is a conversation, every technique a statement, every match an opportunity for growth, both yours and your opponent's. The chamber's door slid open. A tournament official, a tall, spindly Arcturian, peered in. "It's time, Ms. Tanaka. Commander Kailas awaits." Ray opened her eyes and stood. Beyond that door, history waited to be made. Win or lose, this fight would change how humanity was perceived in the galactic community. But more importantly, it would test her family's philosophy against the ultimate challenge: could martial arts truly bridge the gap between species as different as humans and drachnids? As she stepped into the arena, the roar of the crowd washing over her, Ray allowed herself a small smile. She had spent her entire life preparing for a moment like this, though she'd never imagined it would be quite so literal a test of humanity's place among the stars. Kailas stood in the center of the fighting space, her scales now a deep crimson of battle readiness. The Drachnid warriors' eyes, all four of them, focused on Ray with predatory intensity. The fight that would change everything was about to begin. In the preparation chamber beneath the auxiliary arena, Ray Tanaka wrapped her hands with traditional cotton binding, eschewing the modern nanofiber protection favored by most competitors. Each methodical wrap represented a link to her past, to the generations of martial artists who had brought her to this moment. Through the chamber's crystalline walls, she could hear the crowds above placing bets and arguing about the upcoming fight. The odds against her had reached astronomical levels, 15 to 1 at last count. She smiled, thinking of how her mother would have loved those odds. A holographic message flickered to life beside her. Her father's weathered face appeared, his eyes carrying both pride and concern. "Ray, your mother would have been proud. She always said you take our art to the stars." He paused, swallowing hard. "But she also taught us that every fight is more than just combat. Have you figured out why the commander really challenged you?" The question had been nagging at Ray since the challenge. Kailas could have easily waited for their scheduled match tomorrow. Why risk everything in an unsanctioned bout? Meanwhile, in the Drachnid preparation chamber, Commander Kailas was conducting her own pre-battle ritual. Her scales had shifted to a deep midnight blue as she meditated, surrounded by the holographic images of her previous victories. But her mind kept returning to one particular image, a defeat from 15 years ago. The recording showed a younger Kailas facing her mentor, Warsage Valera, in the sacred proving grounds of their homeworld. "Your strength is magnificent," Valera had said after thoroughly defeating her protégé, "but you mistake dominance for victory. True combat is a bridge between warriors, not a wall to separate them." Kailas had spent years dismissing those words as the ramblings of an aging warrior. But watching the human fight in this tournament had awakened something. Ray Tanaka didn't overpower her opponents, she connected with them, turned their energy against them, found harmony in chaos. It was everything Valera had tried to teach her. A sharp buzz interrupted her meditation. On her personal communicator, a message from the Drachnid High Command flashed urgently: "Commander, remember your duties. Humanity must be shown their place. Their rapid expansion threatens stability in 3 sectors. A public lesson here could save us from diplomatic complications later." Kailas's scales flickered with irritation as she deleted the message. The High Command, like so many, had misunderstood her challenge. This wasn't about politics or species superiority, it was about something far more personal. In the spectators' area, Toshi Yamamoto sat beside an elderly Drachnid observer, trying to understand the deeper implications of the upcoming fight. The Drachnid, introducing himself as scholar-historian Kex, shared an interesting perspective. "Your friend," Kex said, his translator struggling with the complex emotional harmonics in his voice, "she fights like the legendary warsage Valera. The same one who trained Commander Kailas before disappearing into self-imposed exile. The commander's challenge isn't just about combat, it's about confronting the philosophy she once rejected." Toshi leaned forward, intrigued. "What happened to warsage Valera? She believed our species had lost its way, that we had forgotten the true purpose of martial arts. She saw combat as a means of understanding, not dominance. The High Command considered such ideas dangerous, especially as we encountered more species like yours, physically weaker but innovative, adaptable. Above them, the arena's environmental systems began adjusting the atmosphere and gravity to settings acceptable for both species. The air grew slightly thicker, the gravity settling at 1.5 times Earth normal, a compromise between their homeworlds." In her chamber, Rei finished her preparations by touching the small pendant hidden beneath her GI, a piece of meteorite her grandmother had found the day humans first learned they weren't alone in the universe. "Every fight is a conversation," she whispered her family's mantra, understanding it now more deeply than ever. Kailas, too, completed her preparations, but with an additional ritual she hadn't performed since training with Valera. She adjusted her scales to match the neutral learning colors of a student, not the battle crimson expected of a commander. The gesture would be noticed by every Drachnid watching, and there would be consequences. The arena's ancient bell began its 3-minute warning sequence. In those final moments, both warriors came to similar realizations about the true nature of their upcoming battle. This fight wasn't just about proving superiority or defending species pride. It was about bridging two philosophies, about proving that combat could build understanding across the stars. As they prepared to enter the arena, neither warrior could know that their conversation would reshape relations between their species for generations to come. But both felt the weight of destiny in their final preparations, a sense that this fight would be about something far greater than victory or defeat. The bell's final tone reverberated through the arena, calling them to make history. The auxiliary arena fell silent as both warriors took their positions. Kailas towered over Rei, her scales now shifting between neutral learning colors that confused many spectators expecting the traditional battle crimson. Rei's calm demeanor betrayed no fear despite facing an opponent who could easily crush her skull with one hand. The ancient bell rang once. The fight began. Kailas moved first, covering the distance between them with frightening speed. Her primary arms swept forward in a crushing motion while her secondary limbs protected her midsection, a traditional Drachnid opening designed to overwhelm smaller opponents. But Rei wasn't there anymore. The human fighter had dropped and rolled, using the increased gravity to her advantage. She swept past Kailas's legs, forcing the Drachnid to pivot. The movement was precise, efficient, nothing wasted. Kailas's scales flickered with surprise. This wasn't the defensive retreat she'd expected. "First lesson of Earth's gravity," Rei called out, already back on her feet. "We learn to use our opponent's weight against them before we ever learn to punch." Kailas responded with a combination of strikes that would have overwhelmed any ordinary opponent. Her four arms moved in perfect coordination, each blow carrying enough force to shatter concrete. But Rei flowed between the attacks like water, redirecting force rather than blocking it. The crowd watched in disbelief as the human appeared to dance through the Drachnid's assault. Every devastating blow seemed to miss by millimeters, and each time Kailas committed to an attack, she found herself slightly off balance. "You move like Valera," Kailas said, her translator conveying genuine curiosity rather than anger. She launched another series of attacks, but now she was studying Rei's movements, learning. Rei recognized the shift in her opponent's approach. The Drachnid was no longer fighting to dominate, she was exploring, testing, understanding. This was the true conversation beginning. The human fighter seized the moment to demonstrate her own philosophy. As Kylus threw a powerful right hook, Rey stepped into the attack rather than away from it. She placed her hand on the Drachnid's wrist, adding her own force to the punch's momentum. Kylus found herself turning, her own strength becoming her weakness. For a moment, the massive alien warrior was airborne. She crashed onto the arena floor with an impact that shook the entire structure. The crowd gasped collectively. No one had ever seen a Drachnid thrown in official competition. Kylus rolled to her feet, her scales now pulsing with a pattern that the translator couldn't interpret. "Your technique," she said, "it honors the force rather than fighting it." "And yours," Rey responded, settling into a defensive stance, "is beginning to adapt to mine." The observation was accurate. Kylus's next attack series was different, more fluid, less dependent on raw power. She had begun incorporating elements of Rey's movement style into her own fighting form. But Rey had been waiting for this moment. As Kylus launched a more sophisticated combination, the human fighter revealed another layer of her strategy. She caught one of the Drachnid's secondary arms and used it to tangle the primary arm on the same side. It was a technique specifically designed for multi-limbed opponents, developed by studying recordings of previous tournaments. What followed was a sequence of moves that left the audience breathless. Rey used Kylus's entangled arms as leverage, scaling the Drachnid's body like a climber ascending a cliff. Before Kylus could react, Rey had reached her shoulder level and executed a perfect arm bar on one of her free limbs. The hold should have been decisive, it would have dislocated the shoulder of any human opponent. But Drachnid physiology was different. Kylus's arm simply rotated in its socket, allowing her to grasp Rey with her free hand. Now it was Rey's turn to be airborne. Kylus threw her across the arena with enough force to end the fight. But instead of crashing, Rey turned the momentum into a controlled roll, coming up ready in a three-point stance. Blood trickled from a small cut above her eye, but Rey's smile remained unchanged. "Second lesson of Earth's gravity," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned arena. "We learn to fall before we learn to stand." Kylus's scales shifted to a completely new pattern, one that made elder Drachnids in the audience lean forward in shock. It was the color pattern of revelation, traditionally shown only in sacred learning ceremonies. "Your species," Kylus said, her voice carrying a new tone of respect, "sees weakness as a teacher rather than an enemy." Rey nodded, maintaining her stance. "And strength without understanding is just weight waiting to be redirected." The next exchange would change everything. Both warriors moved simultaneously, each having learned from the other, each ready to demonstrate that this fight had become something more than combat. But as they clashed in the center of the arena, something unexpected happened, something that would be discussed in martial arts schools across the galaxy for decades to come. The unexpected moment came when both warriors' techniques merged perfectly in the center of the arena. Rey's redirect met Kylus's strike in a way that created a perfect spiral of motion, lifting both fighters off their feet in a synchronized dance of combat. For 3 full seconds, they moved as one entity. Rey's hands found perfect purchase on Kylus's scales, while the Drachnid's multiple arms supported rather than crushed. They spun through the air, neither dominating nor yielding, creating a physical representation of harmony between their vastly different fighting philosophies. When they landed, the arena was dead silent. The spectators had just witnessed something unprecedented, a perfect fusion of Drachnid power and human adaptability. "That," Kylus announced, her scales now radiating patterns of deep insight, "was the truth Valera tried to teach me. Combat isn't about domination. It's about achieving harmony through struggle." Rey nodded, settling into a new stance that incorporated elements of Drachnid fighting philosophy. "My grandmother would say we've moved beyond fighting into true martial arts." Their next exchange demonstrated this evolution. Kylus no longer relied solely on her superior strength and reach. Instead, she began incorporating human-style footwork, making her massive frame move with unexpected agility. Rey, in turn, stopped purely evading and started using modified Drachnid power strikes, adapted for her human physiology. The crowd watched in amazement as the two warriors created something entirely new. Each technique flowed into the next, neither style dominating but both enhanced by their fusion. Drachnid spectators saw their ancient art evolving before their eyes, while humans witnessed their adaptability reaching new heights. Scholar-historian Kex, watching from the stands, began recording frantically. "This is unprecedented," he muttered to Toshi. "They're creating a new combat form, one that bridges the physiological gap between our species. The implications for interspecies martial arts are staggering." The fight's intensity hadn't decreased, but its nature had fundamentally changed. Each exchange now taught both fighters something new. When Kylus launched a traditional Drachnid crushing strike, Rei didn't just evade, she redirected the force in a way that helped Kylus maintain balance rather than lose it. When Rei attempted a joint lock, Kylus used her multiple arms not to break free, but to create a cooperative movement that benefited both fighters. The arena's sensors were recording everything, capturing data that would be studied in dojos and military academies across the galaxy. The fight had transcended its original purpose, becoming a masterclass in interspecies combat evolution. High in the arena's diplomatic section, a Drachnid High Command observer reached for his emergency communicator, intent on stopping this dangerous display of martial arts fusion. But before he could activate it, 3 elder Drachnids blocked his access. They recognized what was happening below as the fulfillment of Warsage Valera's prophecy, that true strength would come from understanding between species, not dominance over them. As the fight entered its final phase, both warriors were covered in sweat and minor injuries, but their movements had become increasingly synchronized. They were no longer fighting against each other but working together to explore the boundaries of their combined arts. Rei's GI was torn, revealing the meteorite pendant she wore. Kylus's scales had settled into a pattern that combined both learning and teaching colors, something many Drachnids had thought impossible. The crowd had stopped betting. Instead, martial artists of various species had begun taking notes, recording movements, and discussing the implications of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a fight anymore, it was the birth of something revolutionary. "Your pendant," Kylus said during a momentary pause, "it's made from a star stone, isn't it?" Rei touched the meteorite briefly. "The same one that fell the day we learned we weren't alone in the universe. My grandmother said it was a sign that humanity's martial arts would need to evolve for a bigger galaxy." Kylus's scales rippled with understanding. "Valera said something similar. That when we found species willing to exchange knowledge rather than submit to power, our art would transcend its origins." They circled each other one last time, but now every spectator could see that this was no longer about winning or losing. The next exchange would be about completing the bridge they had built between their styles, their species, and their philosophies of combat. The final exchange lasted exactly 17 seconds. Rei and Kylus moved in perfect synchronization, demonstrating a blend of techniques that had never been seen before. The sequence ended with both warriors grasping each other's arms in the traditional Drachnid gesture of warrior bonding, while maintaining the balanced stance of Earth martial arts. "I yield," they said simultaneously, causing their translators to create an harmonic echo that resonated throughout the arena. The crowd erupted, not in cheers or boos, but in profound discussion. Martial artists from dozens of species were already forming groups, practicing movements they'd witnessed, debating the implications of this new combat philosophy. Scholar-historian Kex rushed to the arena floor, his recording devices still running. "This must be documented properly," he announced. The birth of the first true interspecies martial art. The Drachnid High Command observer who had tried to stop the fight earlier approached Kylus with a formal censure ready. But she turned to him with her scales displaying the ancient pattern of absolute certainty, a pattern that, by Drachnid law, even the High Command couldn't challenge. "I understand now why Valera chose exile," Kylus declared. "She wasn't running from our traditions. She was waiting for the moment when another species would prove worthy of evolution through combat. Today, we have found that species. Ray bowed deeply to her opponent, now her partner in this revolution. In yielding to each other, we've both won something greater than victory. Within hours, the recording of their fight had spread across the galaxy. Dojos on Earth began incorporating Drachnid principles into their training. Drachnid warrior academies started studying human adaptability techniques. The tournament committee created a new division specifically for mixed-species martial arts development. 1 month later, the Drachnid High Command officially recognized the new combat form, naming it Harmony Style in their language. Earth's United Combat Federation simultaneously dubbed it Bridge Form in recognition of its ability to connect different species through martial arts. 6 months after the historic fight, Ray and Kylus opened the first interspecies combat academy on a neutral space station. Their first student was a young Drachnid wearing Warsage Valera's training colors. Their second was Ray's niece, carrying the same meteorite pendant her aunt had worn during the fight. But perhaps the most significant change came in diplomatic relations. The Drachnid High Command and Earth's governments began using martial arts exhibitions as diplomatic tools, demonstrating that different species could find harmony through controlled conflict rather than war. 1 year to the day after their fight, Ray and Kylus stood before a class of students from 15 different species. On the wall behind them hung a simple statement in both Earth Standard and Drachnid script. True victory lies not in domination, but in the evolution of understanding through combat. Below these words sat a small display case containing 2 items, Ray's meteorite pendant and a scale Kylus had shed during their fight, both now changing colors in perfect synchronization, a reminder that the greatest challenges often lead to the most unexpected harmonies. As they began teaching the day's lesson, both warriors knew that their defeat had led to the greatest victory either could have imagined, a future where combat served not to separate species, but to bring them together in ways diplomacy alone never could.